So imagine this. You get a divorce in one country and you think, okay, I'm free to move on. But then you find out that in another country, you're still legally married, and your ex can actually try to claim your property. That's the incredibly complex reality at the heart of Van Dorn versus Romillo Jr. It's a landmark case that had to untangle this messy legal knot between the Philippines and the United States, and in doing so, it completely changed the game for international families under the law.
All right, to really get this, we're going to walk through the whole story in 5 parts. First, we'll look at the international marriage that started it all. Then, we'll dive into the lawsuit that popped up after the divorce. After that, we'll see how the laws of 2 different countries smashed right into each other. Then comes the really good part, the Supreme Court's clever answer. And finally, we'll talk about why this one case is still so important today.
Okay, so let's start with the folks at the heart of all this. We're talking about an international couple whose personal story ended up setting a huge legal precedent that affects people to this day. So here are the facts of the case. Back in 1972, a Filipino citizen, Alice Reyes, married a U.S. citizen, Richard Upton. They moved to the Philippines, had 2 kids, and built a life there. But after about a decade, things took a turn, and in 1982, they got a divorce in Nevada.
Now, this right here, this is the single most important detail in this entire story. The fact that she was Filipino and he was American. This one simple difference in their passports is what kicks off an incredibly complicated legal firestorm that goes all the way to the top.
So they have an American divorce decree. You'd think that's the end of it, right? Story over? Well, nope, not even close. This was actually just the beginning of a whole new legal fight, but this time it was happening in the Philippines. During that Nevada divorce, Richard made a really critical statement. He officially said they had no community property. Now, that's just legal talk for any shared stuff, assets, businesses that needed to be split up. You're going to want to file that little detail away because it comes back in a big way.
So get this, just 1 year after saying they had nothing to split in an American court, Richard turns around and files a lawsuit in the Philippines. And what's he suing over? A business his now ex-wife Alice owned in Manila called the Galleon Shop.
And this slide just lays out the massive contradiction perfectly. In the US, he says we have no shared property. But in the Philippines, he argues that the Galleon Shop is actually their conjugal property and that as her husband, he gets to help manage it. You see what he's doing? He's trying to be divorced in America, but still married in the Philippines. So this contradiction sets up the huge legal problem here. This case was never really just about a shop. It was about a head-on collision between 2 entire legal systems. This really put the Philippine courts in a tough spot. I mean, Richard's divorce was totally legal and valid in the United States, but the Philippines, at the time, didn't allow absolute divorce for its own citizens. So this was the central issue. When 2 national laws are in direct conflict like this, which one wins? Now, to understand the Philippine side of things, you've got to know about a core legal idea called the nationality principle. It's pretty straightforward, really. It just means that when it comes to family law, Philippine laws follow Filipino citizens no matter where they are in the world. You don't just leave your legal status at the border. So now you see the problem, right? It's a total paradox. From the Philippine perspective, because of its laws and that nationality principle, Alice was still married to Richard. But from the American perspective, Richard was a single man, totally divorced from Alice. It created this bizarre, legally impossible situation. So how in the world does a court solve a puzzle like this? Well, the Philippine Supreme Court came up with a pretty brilliant and elegant answer. This is the ruling. And here is the genius of their reasoning. The court cleverly avoided getting stuck on whether the divorce was valid for Alice, the Filipino citizen. Instead, they flipped the question around and put the spotlight squarely on Richard. He was an American citizen, right? So under his own country's laws, that divorce was absolutely valid and binding on him. The court then used this powerful piece of logic from an American Supreme Court case. And the idea is just simple, profound common sense. A marriage takes 2 people. So if Richard's own country says he's no longer Alice's husband, how can he possibly show up in a Philippine court and claim he is? The bond was cut. So the court's conclusion really boiled down to 2 things. First, Richard had no legal right or standing to sue as Alice's husband because, well, he wasn't one anymore. And second, he was legally estopped, That's basically a formal way of saying, sorry, you can't say there's no shared property in one courtroom and then claim there is shared property in another. And so, the final disposition, the final order, was crystal clear. The Supreme Court said Alice was right, and it ordered the lower court to completely throw out Richard Upton's lawsuit. It was a total victory for Alice Reyes von Dorn.
But this story doesn't end with just one couple's legal fight. The real legacy of this case is the powerful legal principle it created, one that continues to shape the lives of international families to this very day. What came out of this is something we now call the Van Dorn Doctrine. To put it simply, it says that if your foreign spouse gets a divorce in their home country, and that divorce is legal there, then the Philippines will recognize it. And, this is the crucial part, the Filipino spouse is then also considered single and free to remarry. And why does this matter so much? Well, it's all about basic fairness. It put an end to this crazy, unjust, one-sided situation where a foreigner could be divorced and free while their Filipino ex was stuck in a marriage that didn't even exist anymore. It made it clear you can't play two legal systems against each other, and it gave Filipino citizens the freedom to actually move on. You know, the Van Dorn case was a huge step forward, a necessary change for a world that was becoming more and more connected. And it leaves us with a question that's probably more important now than it's ever been. As our lives, our families, and our relationships continue to stretch across borders, how do we make sure our laws keep evolving to deliver justice for everyone, no matter what passport they hold?